Drive Live Formula One.
Well, the Spanish Grand Prix comes to an end. Round 10 of 24 completed, and it's Max Verstappen who finds himself yet again standing on the top step of the podium. Lando Norris finished in second, with Lewis Hamilton getting his first podium for Mercedes this season, rounding out the rostrum. But it wasn't as plain sailing for Verstappen as perhaps the results look on paper. Calling all the action alongside myself was the former Renault Formula One driver Jolyon Palmer and the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson. Max Verstappen won this race, but it didn't come straight to him. It all had to be done really on the first couple of laps.
He did an amazing job to make it past, first of all, Lando Norris. At the start, he got a better launch than Norris, got himself up on the inside on the run down to the first corner. It meant that Lando couldn't properly defend that first corner because Verstappen's front wing was already alongside. In fact, he was even squeezed to the grass. Russell had a brilliant start, double slipstream, and came around both of them. But the crucial part was Verstappen clearing Norris, and then he set about Russell, and that was the second phase of it. So firstly, getting ahead of Norris, who was the only real threat in terms of pace today, but then clearing Russell, who would then be a lovely buffer for Verstappen to have Norris dropping back behind Russell. A crucial, incisive pass, and it won him the race.
Given that Norris didn't get that launch quite right, or whatever it was that happened at between the McLaren and him, and he was always fighting a losing battle in a way, fending Verstappen off on the inside by moving to the inside, Jolyon. I wonder whether he would have been better advised just to stay to the outside, keep on the racing line, have the extra grip for braking, and try and fend off McLaren that way through turns 1 and 2. What do you think?
I think it's difficult. I don't mind what he tried to do. I mean, he was so aggressive coming across to the inside. I think that's your instinct, is to try and just get to that inside. It's a long run to the first corner. If you're on the inside and you're in the race lead, you can brake as late as you want and just not let anyone come around the outside. So I can understand that. Okay, then you're talking about once he hasn't managed to command that position, does he then open it up? It's tricky because then you're giving Verstappen a lot of room. You move to the outside, Verstappen will then also move with you to the middle of the road, and he is not going to back off from that position. Whereas if he's coming right from the inside line, it's a tougher position for Max to be in. And he's just so aggressive that he sent it regardless. And then there's the complicating factor of Russell coming through as well. So again, if Norris is on the outside, you've got double shot of Russell coming through and Verstappen being on the inside. Maybe it gives him more freedom to be so late on the brakes. And I think he was obviously a little bit cautious in the middle because the driver on your outside is out of your control. And if you smoke it in, then if Russell had committed as he did, you might just clatter into the side of him. But I think your instinct and logic says get to the inside and then to brake late enough to not let anyone around you. And I just think he was too early on the brakes.
Well, it's interesting hearing them in the green room before the podium. He was talking about that exact decision. He was saying if I hadn't braked when I did, Russell would have been in the barriers or upside down in the gravel trap, and maybe all of us could have been in the barriers. He was obviously thinking that three of them into one wasn't going to go, and he was in the middle. He had everything to lose, he was thinking at that point. Live to fight another day, I guess.
I've been there from pole in Barcelona in a GP2 race, and I can't remember the two drivers. One was Stefano Coletti, who was a bit of a wild card driver. I can't remember who the other one was. And I was pincered. It's a long run to that first corner. I was in the middle, and I couldn't get across to cover the inside. Coletti steaming it around the outside, and you're looking in both mirrors and you're thinking, how on earth is this going to happen? So often you do get a collision at the first corner. We've seen it in Formula One. I was also quite early on the brakes when I had mine, and luckily the guy on my inside and the guy on my outside swung into each other and took themselves out. I had a little nibble in my front wing, but I carried on in the lead of the race. It was absolutely beautiful. But there is a point where if Norris had have matched Russell on the brakes, Russell maybe isn't able to go around the outside of him, and then you're worried about Verstappen steaming in. But that's on Max at that point, not to barrel in on the inside and wipe out two drivers on the outside if he goes the whole way across the track. So I think in hindsight, that's your chance. But it is difficult when you're in that position and you're feeling quite vulnerable off the line. You're seeing nothing ahead of you, clear track, but you know there are drivers attacking on the inside, getting a nose in, and you know there's a Mercedes sweeping on the outside. You're looking in your mirrors, and in those crucial moments, it is difficult. I think if Verstappen was in Norris's shoes, he's not being outbraked. And if they both go through the runoff, they both go through the runoff. He's more aggressive. I think we've seen it time and time again on the opening corner.
Well, that was all just going down to turn one on lap one. Come the end of 66 laps, Max Verstappen crossed the line first. Let's hear what he had to say.
Not an easy race, of course. I think what really made our race was the first 2 laps where I took the lead. And I could build up a little bit of a gap against Lando. Because as soon as Lando was in free air, he was really, really quick. And basically every stint, of course, especially at the end, he was catching me a lot. They were just better on tires, they could push harder. But I think as a team, we did the right strategy. We were quite aggressive with the slots, and luckily it was just enough to the end.
Just how much were you having to push in those closing stages? Take us into the cockpit.
Yeah, I was pushing to the limit because the tires are overheating. It's not that easy. So I was just trying to manage everything as well as I could.
Do you expect this to continue next time out in Austria? A different track layout, but it really does look as though you've got several teams in the mix.
I would like to win, but we need to find more pace because we can't always rely on, the perfect strategy, get everything right at the start. These are things that work here and there, but ultimately you need to be the fastest car on track, to keep on winning.
Well, Verstappen doesn't think that Red Bull were the fastest car out there today, yet they won the race. And you mentioned it a little just before we heard from him, Andrew, that the type of driver that Verstappen is. What is it about him that just seems to set him against the rest with a couple of tenths in hand, just purely within himself?
Well, Harry, you said Red Bull won the race. I disagree. Verstappen won the race. It was all about him. He got the perfect start, just alongside Norris enough to stop Norris coming over and defending. He made a brilliant move on Russell at the start of lap 3, round the outside of turn 1. Decisive, controlled, car positioned in exactly the right place. And then Norris wasn't able to do that now. Of course, Norris can say, of course, the tyres were overheating by then, which is definitely true, because you see this quite often. If you don't make your move early, then you do get stuck behind another car because of the tyre overheating, because of the way these Pirellis are. I'm not going to go on about Pirelli again. But that's the thing about Verstappen. When he needs to do something, he does it. He needed a good start, he got it. He needed to pass Russell quickly, he did it. And then he needed to build a lead while Norris was stuck behind Russell, he did it. And then he spent the rest of the race defending with the help of a Red Bull strategy, keeping him in track position, keeping him with clear air, feeding out his tyre life just enough. He is operating at an incredibly high level at the moment. I think we shouldn't underestimate just how good Max Verstappen is. People might get a bit bored of seeing him win all the time. He is one of the all-time greats. It's an absolute privilege to be watching him operating at this level, and all the other drivers have got to step up to that level if they want to keep beating him, even though they might have a faster car from time to time, which I think Lando Norris has pretty much right now.
Well, in that vein, Jolien, Lando Norris said he feels he should have won this race. Should he?
Well, yeah, he was on pole in the fastest car. That's the objective view. It's not the easiest place to have pole. We know what happened at the start. The thing with Verstappen is, I completely echo Andrew's comments. He was just superb today. This was one of those ones. He's been brilliant for a couple of years, but when he wins by 30 seconds, you don't witness that. You just witness the timings just opening up, and he's away. When he's hard fought, he's hard pushed, as he was in Canada, as he was here. You see the crucial moments where he makes things happen. The start, the move on Russell. In Canada as well, there were crucial parts, and the strategy call obviously was big in the safety car. But he is really making the difference. And what I like about him is, in now racecraft, he's aggressive, but he very rarely looks clumsy. And that's a very difficult line to balance, of being aggressive, being able to stick a nose in on the inside of two cars on your outside, but you don't expect him to just wash wide and wipe any of them out. He makes very few clumsy mistakes, and he is incisive, and when he's on the outside of Russell, he gets it done, or he'll back off, but he very rarely has a collision, and he very rarely backs off either.
That's it. I think that move on Russell I thought was just sublime. Elegant, exquisite, perfectly judged in every way. And I remember saying a few races ago, we all discussed this between us, what would happen when Verstappen was challenged again? Would we see this mature Verstappen carry on? Would we see the Verstappen of 2021 who was chucking it down the inside of Lewis Hamilton, forcing him off the track, doing moves that the other drivers thought were unfair, beyond the rules? So far, we've seen the mature control Verstappen. He's marrying control and maturity with aggression and pace in an absolutely brilliant way at the moment. He's going to remain really hard to beat, even if, as he just said in that audio clip, he doesn't quite have the fastest car at the moment.
And the aggression, I mean, obviously 2021 is the one that would keep appearing when, I mean, he was so aggressive at the end of that season. And we know the battle with Hamilton and how that all shook out. But that was now 3 years ago. And in the last couple of seasons, he's been winning so many races. A lot of the time he hasn't had to fight. But when he has, he still shows moments of aggression. At the start of the race in Vegas last year, he launched it in on the inside of Leclerc, who had pole. It was too much. He got a penalty for it, but he doesn't risk the collision. He'll risk maybe getting a penalty, but he's very clever in the way that he races. And it was those two moments, one passing Norris, one passing Russell, where you didn't think they were going to crash. And you did think that Max, in these sort of 50-50s, is going to come out on top.
I think he's very clever, full stop. I think it's easy to underestimate that about Max Verstappen. You know, he's quite direct in the way he speaks, but it's not just on track this year. When he's been speaking publicly, let's not forget that this has been an incredibly controversial year for Red Bull. The team principal was accused of sexual harassment by a female employee, which he denied. They've lost their chief technical officer, Adrian Newey, as a result of that. Verstappen's not been happy about all of that. And he's made that clear in public, but in a very strategic, subtle way where he's got his message across without saying anything that could be upsetting towards the team. You can read between the lines, but you have to read between the lines. So, and just the same way on track, smart, that's what he's been. Aggressive, clinical, incredibly fast, but also smart, and we shouldn't underestimate that side of Max Verstappen.
A hypothetical for you both. Verstappen calls it quits at the end of this season in Formula One. You mentioned all of those adjectives about him. Where do you place Verstappen on the all-time list? Is he already 27 years of age with those attributes the greatest?
There's a bunch of drivers that you can't. It's really hard to call between over in the course of history. We all know who they are: Fangio, Clark, Moss, Stewart, Senna, Hamilton, Schumacher. He's in that bracket now. I mean, everyone can argue their own opinion, but you can't argue that he's in that bracket.
Well, he won the race. He pipped Lando Norris. Let's hear from him.
We should have won. The team deserved the win. I just lost out a little bit in the 2 meters. I lost out in the beginning of the race. This was enough for Max to get to the inside, and if there wasn't George on the outside, I think I could have kept it on the outside and covered him. But George is on the outside, and if I tried to outbrake George, we would have both crashed, So George just got a good start and had a perfect slipstream all the way down. Nothing I can do about that. That's just that's Barcelona, 600 meters down to turn one. When you're leading and you have no slipstream, you lose a lot of speed compared to them. So in some ways, I think not a lot I could have done. In some ways, if I was maybe 1 or 2 meters ahead, potentially I could have got away with it, So difficult one to know in hindsight. And I'll review things and see what I did wrong or what we didn't do well enough in the start. But after that, things were great, It was tricky to follow and tricky to get past at times. But the pace, the tire management was just what we needed to get back in second and to try and catch Max.
We heard you on the radio with your engineer discussing the strategy. Can you talk us through that, obviously going longer into the race in that first stint?
Yeah, our pace was clearly a lot stronger than the guys who were around. We're the quickest on track, so we could afford to play around a little bit more and try certain things. Always the end of life management for us was much stronger than them, so 4 or 5 laps before the pit stops is where our pace was hugely stronger than them. So yeah, again, a shame the race wasn't another 5-10 laps, but it's the way it is, and maybe I need to push a little bit more than what I have been doing. But at the same time, it's very easy if you push too much in the beginning to be too slow at the end and kind of not have the ability to play with your strategy and do things like we did today. So I think we had a good day in terms of strategy, and after turn 2, I don't think there was much more we could have done to get back to Max. But yeah, I'm happy with 99% of things. It's just that the 1%, which is a big part of it all, wasn't good enough today.
99% happy then. That just highlights the fine margins at the top end in Formula One at the moment. But this bodes well still for the next couple of races, Jolien, in terms of the competitive order. Do you think Lando Norris and the McLaren will be there challenging Verstappen and Red Bull?
Absolutely. Barcelona is an indicator to a different sort of circuit, how the pace is, downforce and high speed, long, fast corners. And we got Austria coming up. We've got Silverstone coming up. Then we've got Budapest and Spa as well. All conventional racetracks. And Norris is going to be a threat. He maybe is the fastest driver in the fastest package at the moment. He just has these small little things that are going wrong. I quite like that the drivers, they're kind of very self-critical at the moment, this era of driver. And Lando pretty much described perfectly the race. After lap 2, I thought he was very good. He's still driving at such a high level. He's got so much confidence. It was just the opening lap and then being stuck behind Russell. Verstappen made it through. He didn't really get a look in to try and put the move on. And that was his race. But he'll be a threat again in the next races, definitely.
So Norris has just moved into second place in the championship ahead of Charles Leclerc, only by 2 points ahead of Leclerc, who I think is actually having a really good season, by the way. We'll come on to Ferrari in a minute, I'm sure. But he's now 69 points behind Verstappen. Now, that's a big gap, but he's got the fastest car, and he could have won 3 of the last 5 races. If he can start...
Championship still on? Is this where you're
that's
going?
What I'm saying, yes, absolutely.
Whoa.
If he can start delivering on his potential, and that's not easy when you're against Max Verstappen and Red Bull, and it's assuming that the McLaren continues with this advantage. But he's now got 4 races before the summer break. Austria, Silverstone, Hungary, Spa. If the McLaren can be the quickest car in Spain, it can be the quickest car at all those circuits. He could eat into Verstappen's lead a little bit, and then it's such a long season. I still think Verstappen's an overwhelming hot favourite for the championship, but Norris can turn this into a fight if he can just find that 1% that he's talking about.
Get Andrew Benson a cappuccino and the negativity turns to positive. What's this?
Well, who was it that said F1
Treat
is if
right,
start backwards? Where was my cappuccino? I obviously missed out on the cappuccino run. Well, that was your top 2 then. A fierce race for Verstappen, who extends his lead in the championship. And as Andrew said, Norris now slots up into second. But let's talk about the man who finished 3rd on the podium. 10 races in, Lewis Hamilton finally gets his first podium of the season for Mercedes. And this is great news, though, isn't it, for Hamilton and Mercedes in general. They've been bringing upgrades incrementally over the last few races. And after, I suppose, quite a few false starts with their car and their package moving forward, this now seems like a definitive, they have found the way forward now. Would you agree?
Finally, yeah. After Canada, obviously the surprise pole from Russell, and then to bring that to a very different circuit and still be fast, not quite on the same level as the top 2, but they had the next 2 cars, Russell and Hamilton, so evenly matched. And I think it was important for Lewis to get back ahead of George today. I think out-qualifying Russell was important, and then just having a slightly better race pace, which we've seen all year. Even though he's been beaten quite well in qualifying, his race pace is always more competitive. I think that was the case again today. If Hamilton had have taken the lead instead of Russell at the start, I don't think it would have changed the world. I don't think Mercedes had quite enough pace there, but it would have been a better fight for Norris or Verstappen maybe to try and come through. Because I just think he probably had 1 or 2 extra tenths on George today, was able to sit with him for a lot of the race. And then when they diverged the strategies, he got up to 3rd. Psychologically, a nice one, I think, for Lewis.
Well, let's hear what he had to say after getting his first podium of 2024.
Lewis, congratulations. Back on the podium. You must be feeling pretty happy about that one.
Yeah, I feel great. I feel fantastic. Still plenty of energy, and after a bad start, to recover and get back into P3 is really, really, really great job. Really happy with, particularly my second and last stint were very, very strong. And I think the first one I was just recovering from such a bad start, so that was a little bit more tricky. But yeah, we're getting there, we're getting closer, and big thank you to the team because we're slowly closing the gap.
lots of battling out there, moves on Carlos, your teammate George. Can you talk us through those ones?
Yeah, with George, well, firstly with Carlos, I mean, they shortened the DRS, so not so easy to follow through the last corner, and I really had to pull this move off as early as possible. And so he moved over but didn't completely cover the inside, so I went for the inside. And yeah, it was very, very close, very close between us. He tried to hold and stay on the outside, but I left him a little bit of room, but it was nice and tight.
We spoke earlier in the weekend about the momentum seeming to really be building at Mercedes. How much have you enjoyed these past few weekends, and particularly today, getting back on the podium?
This is the best weekend I've had all year, and for a long, long time, for like 15 races or something crazy. So it's good to be back. It's good to have battles like today. It's good to reassert and reaffirm.
Thanks, Lewis.
Lewis Hamilton with momentum behind him as well is one to be very wary of indeed. Third on the podium in front of his teammate George Russell. I mean, there's a little bit of prickliness there, isn't there, between Hamilton and Russell as teammates. They split the strategies this afternoon. Russell went on to finish the race on the hard tyre, whereas Lewis put on the soft. Russell also had a slow pit stop as well. Do you think Russell will be sort of asking a lot of questions in the debrief this evening?
I don't think so, because they stopped him. The reason he fitted the hard tyre at his stop was because they had to stop him when they stopped him, because he was running out of tyre life, and there wasn't the mileage in the soft to go to the end from that stop time, and that's his ability to look after the tyres in the race compared to Hamilton's, which feeds into what Jolyon was saying earlier about Hamilton's generally had the stronger race pace. I think you would say that was consistently true, actually, of the last 2.5 years or so that they've been teammates. Not always, but as an average, Hamilton, they've been incredibly close in qualifying, and Russell is 8-2, even though the margin between them on average is less than a tenth now after this weekend. But Hamilton's generally been the more impressive driver in the race. So I don't think Russell can have any complaints. That was just the way his race unfolded because of the way he was performing in the car.
Well, Russell ended the race in fourth, but both Mercedes, I'm sure, will be happy because they finished ahead of both Ferraris. Charles Leclerc ended up in fifth position ahead of Carlos Sainz. Jolyon, how did you look at Ferrari's, I suppose, weekend in general? They brought an upgrade, but Leclerc from the beginning of the weekend didn't have the full upgrade in FP1, hasn't felt comfortable in the car. I think they expected a lot more from qualifying, but it never really came to them. The pace just didn't seem to be there this weekend. Do you think this is going to be a bit of a worry for them, the fact that Mercedes are ahead of them, plus a McLaren?
I think they're in danger of being outdeveloped certainly by McLaren, who they were the fourth best team at the start of the year. Now they're the second or maybe even the best team. And then Mercedes with this big step as well that they bought in Canada. Ferrari won in Monaco, but Monaco is such an outlier as a circuit. Maybe Singapore will be a big hope for them again. But when you look at the other races that they've had, at the start of the year, I was really impressed with Ferrari. Sainz obviously got his win. Leclerc was always on the podium. They look like the closest threat to Red Bull. But now when we're looking ahead to Austria, we're looking at Silverstone. I think the field's tightened up, so it's making Ferrari, if there's similar gap to Verstappen, there are just some Mercedes in there. There's some McLarens in there. They have to get everything right to now fight for a podium. So it's just tightened up. I mean, a small upgrade from them that's successful, and it could make them the fastest car again. It's so tight, but right now they're just slipping down the pecking order generally.
Yeah, it's not just the racing on track, is it? It is that development race off it as well that can often lead to some exciting results. Andrew, you said you think that Charles Leclerc is having a really good season so far. He has just dropped a third in the driver's standings. There's only a couple of points in it there between himself and Lando Norris. Of course, a race win this year too. It is a good season for him.
Solid, consistent, steady, he's scoring regularly. I think Norris is the only driver who's finishing the points all season, but every race all season. But Leclerc, had it not been for Ferrari's absolute catastrophe weekend in Canada, he would have done that too. So I think the thing with Ferrari, we don't know this upgrade this weekend in Spain. Leclerc wasn't unhappy with the car. He was on Friday, but he was said on Saturday they'd done a lot of good work overnight. The handling, the balance, he was happy with, but the pace, as you say, wasn't there, and they got some concerns about that. Obviously, if you put a big upgrade on the car, it was brought a race early or so, a bit like Mercedes have done in the last few races to bring their upgrades early. They will have been expecting more from that upgrade. They would have been expecting to be challenging closer to the front, not be 4 tenths off or whatever it was in qualifying, and not really in the picture in the race. But he drove a really strong race, Leclerc, on a different strategy from Carlos Sainz's teammate. But Jolien was talking about them being outdeveloped. That's a bit of a consistent theme for Ferrari. Fred Vasseur, the team principal who came in at the beginning of last year, he's done a great job. He's stabilised the team well. He's signed Lewis Hamilton. They're trying to sign Adrian Newey. They've turned what was an absolute nasty car last year into a much more benign car this year. And they started the season as second fastest team and won the third race in Australia, albeit Verstappen retired to help them on their way. Since then, Mercedes and McLaren have slowly moved up and Ferrari have slowly moved down. Not by much. It is really tight. But that's another thing that Vasseur needs to get on top of, their ability to consistently develop through a season and not just make changes to the car from one season to the next.
They did do well at the end of last year, though, didn't they? Finally, they managed to sort it out on the tail end of the season, and it really brought Leclerc particularly to life, and he was smashing in the pole positions and looked a threat once again. So it's just subtle changes there. They're not miles away by any stretch. They're very, very close to being potential race winners. They're just missing the last couple of percent out of it, I think.
Well, Ferrari second in the Constructors' Championship at the moment. McLaren a little bit behind them. So that was the top six there. Verstappen, Norris, Hamilton, Russell, Leclerc, Sainz. We spoke a lot about McLaren being the fastest car this weekend, we think, especially during the race in the hands of Lando Norris. But what about Oscar Piastri? He finished the race in 7th. Q3 was just a bit of a mess for Piastri. Didn't go well for him. And that was why he started down in 9th place in the end after a penalty was applied for Perez. But how would you describe not only Piastri's weekend, Andrew, but I suppose his season as a whole so far?
So Piastri he's still in the phase of having highs and lows. Let's not forget, he's only just over a season and a half into his Formula One career. He's done some incredibly impressive things in that season and a half, and
Do you want Perez?
In fact, that got him a contract extension before he was halfway through his debut season last year. But he has the odd down weekend. This weekend, he admitted it was in him, not in the car. He just wasn't getting the best out of himself. Obviously, he made a mistake on his first run in Q3, ran wide, and then he made another mistake on the second run. So had he maximised his potential, he probably would have qualified somewhere in the top 6. I don't think he had Norris's pace this weekend. When he gets everything together, he's at least as quick as Norris, but he's not getting everything together consistently at the moment. But he's got a lot of potential, and everybody sees it.
In some ways, on paper, Piastri's sort of, hate to say it, but slightly underwhelming at the moment on paper. Bearing in mind this is the former F3 champ, the former F2 champ that Alpine really wanted. He ditched them to go to McLaren. There was a clamour for his signature. And he is very much second driver at McLaren in terms of the feeling of the team. And Norris, we're talking about him winning a race, potentially winning others. We're not quite there with Piastri yet. But there are some outstanding glimpses of promise. Monaco was his best chance, but let's not forget Imola. He should have qualified on the front row, but the team let him down in qualifying with communication. He is an outstanding talent, but I also just think Norris is a superb driver. I really do rate Lando, and there are some things that he's not putting completely together to become a multiple race winner, and a couple of races that have just got away from him. But Norris is one of the best drivers in the field, and it's not the easy benchmark for Piastri. So when they're very close, that is, I think, Piastri showing that he can be a future champion.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Jolene. I think that's spot on. In the end, though, it was 7th place for Piastri. Ahead of Sergio Perez, another tough day at the office for the second Red Bull driver. Had a bad qualifying, compounded with a 3-place grid penalty, managed to recover on the last lap, managed to get Pierre Gasly for 8th place. But that top 10 rounded out by the two Alpines, Jolene. Your former team, they seem to have come alive this weekend. I mean, I know it's only 9th and 10th, but both cars in the top 10 in qualifying. This has been their best weekend so far. Is the car actually quite good?
Well, when you take away the straights, the car becomes quite competitive. Monaco, they were very strong. They clashed on the edge of the top 10, but they looked like they were going to score points all weekend, and Gasly got one. And again here, okay, there's one long straight, but apart from that, it's not such a power-sensitive circuit, and they're very competitive again. Their power unit is the weakest, and I do think they've improved the car a lot. It was not where they wanted it to be at all at the start of the season, but they're making good progress. And I still feel like people were really beating up on Alpine at the start of the year. They looked awful in Bahrain, and that's why. And they've major changes behind the scenes, but this is still a team that can work their way back to the midfield, and they're getting there. There are two drivers in the points once again for the second race in a row. Decent drivers, and I think they're sort of justifying where they can be as a midfield team again. They've just overtaken Haas in the Constructors' Championship. I don't think they're going to get much further in it, but getting back to 7th this year after the start of the season that they've had, perfectly solid.
Luca De Meo, the chief executive of Renault, was there this weekend off the back of signing Flavio Briatore as an executive. What's the full role that he's playing, Andrew?
Executive advisor.
Executive advisor for the F1 team to Luca De Meo. But there was also talk coming into the weekend as well that they might drop their engine program, Renault. So now, if the car's actually relatively good, surely it seems logical to stick another engine in it, maybe rebadge it. Job's a good one.
Well, it's worth adding that Briatore was also there this weekend. In fact, there's a lot of obviously staged photo opportunities with Luca De Meo, Flavio Briatore and Bruno Famin, the team principal, walking down the paddock together, on the grid together.
Happy families.
Happy families, exactly, as they obviously are at the moment. I mean, look, to me, it's a bit of an indictment, and it's of Renault's engine program, that the CEO of Renault is thinking of dropping it in 2026.
I wish they dropped it in 2016.
I bet you do.
It would have been amazing. 10 years too late.
You know, this is a company with a storied history in Formula One as an engine supplier. You know, they introduced turbo engines to Formula One in 1977. Everybody laughed at them at the time. Then turbos became de rigueur. They should have been the team that won the first turbo championship, but weren't because of a lot of typical Renault problems, reliability effectively back then in 1982 and 1983 with Alain Prost. They won the championship with Williams, with Nigel Mansell and Alain Prost. They won the championship with Red Bull, and a lot of that Red Bull Vettel era success was down to Renault's expertise in what was called exhaust blowing at the time. That was an engine tuning thing which Adrian Newey and his team exploited to great effect. But since then, they've kind of lost their way. I think you have to raise questions about Renault's Formula One program as a whole, what it's trying to achieve. What they're trying to do is promote the Alpine brand as a sort of sub-brand, a sporty brand. But they make so few cars. And what does it say to the marketplace that they're not making their own engines anymore, potentially, in Formula One, and they're going to go racing with a Mercedes or a Ferrari or a whatever engine? Does that make you want to buy a Renault sports car? I don't know. It's an interesting question. Luca De Meo is the expert in the car in the car market, not me. This isn't to say that he's going to do it, but I think what it says a lot about where Renault's engine program has been in the hybrid era. Red Bull dropped them, let's not forget. It's no secret, as Jolene was saying, that they're now the least effective engine in the field. So, yeah, lots of questions for Alpine still to answer about every level of the team, really.
Well, They did manage to get back-to-back double points finishes, though, for the Alpine team, 9th and 10th. And as you said, Jolien, they leapfrog Haas and go into 7th in the Constructors. The rest of the results were Hülkenberg 11th ahead of Alonso, Joe, Stroll, Ricciardo was 15th, Bottas, Magnussen, Albon, Tsunoda and Sargent 20th and last. All 20 drivers finishing the race, but rather torrid runs for the Williams and the RB teams in particular. I think we're just about there, gents. Anything else I've missed that you want to make a case for? No, Andrew, anything? I
just want to say we've got 4 races in the next 5 weeks coming up, and I'm looking forward to every single one of them. It should be great.
Bring on the cappuccinos.
And just want to say how good it is to have Jolien Palmer back on the BBC team. Isn't that just wonderful?
Even though you didn't get one.
Well, moving on swiftly. When you're back with us? When you're back? Later on in the year?
Oh, yeah.
America, something like that?
I'll drop in for another belter.
Oh, that's it. Sorry, producer Paddy just reminded me. Driver of the day. Who are we going for? Andrew.
Verstappen.
Yeah, Verstappen.
Yeah, Verstappen. Paddy, driver of the day. Joe, Pete. Joe? 2 Joes? Okay, all right, fine. All right then, well, we'll leave it there. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live. We'll see you next time. It's Austria next week, and then it's the British Grand Prix.